Happy Sunday, everybody. Thanks for joining. Slight change in the schedule. I think most of you just got the update sent to you, but I decided to go ahead and switch from Brandy, Calvados, Armagnac to next week's topic of North Central Spain. I felt like we were getting a little bit too granular with spirits there for a little while. It became like we were doing spirit study instead of wine study. So I'm going to give everybody another minute or two to get settled in, and then we'll get fired up. I do think that today's seminar is a little bit shorter. We could probably finish it up in 20 minutes, given that there's only about 25 slides or so. But for today, we're focusing on Rioja and Navarra, and then essentially Aragon. We talked a little bit about Ribera del Duero in our Galicia and Castilla y León discussion previously. So I think this is a good way to attack this particular area. And I like to break up Ribera del Duero from Rioja personally, just to try and make sure that I'm not studying the wrong aging requirements on different things. Let's get fired up. Rioja and Navarra. Right. So subregions of Rioja, this is from the Society of Wine Educators. You can see here in the north, Rioja Alavesa, Rioja Alta, and then Rioja Baja, or this is 2015, which is now known as Rioja Oriental. You can see here too, the important things are that the Ebro River splits the region. Navarra is here to the northeast, and then you can see the subregions that we talked about with Ribera del Duero, Soria and Burgos right there behind it. You can also see a couple of important cities, Haro and Logroño right here. We'll talk a little bit about those as well as we move forward. This is Navarra. You can see here we were just talking about the Ebro River right here cutting through Navarra. This is green Spain right here, and then Navarra here to the northeast, so to speak. This is a pretty cool little map in that it's got a handful of different cities and producers listed on it, so I think it's certainly helpful. The subregions of Navarra, of which there are a handful here, you can see Tierra de Estea, Valdezarbe, Ribera Alta, Valle Montaña, and Ribera Valle. I think this is a great map for looking at that too, trying to sort of understand why these regions are broken out. Like you can see why obviously the Baja is down here, Alta here in the north, and then Valdezarbe and Tierra de Estela even further north as you get towards Pamplona. Aragon as a whole for the area, you can see butts right up almost to the Pyrenees Mountains in southern France right here. There's a handful of DOP here, Somontano here, Campo de Borja here, Calatayud and Cariñena, and then just a whole bunch of IGPs you can see all listed right here. So in general in the region, this is where sort of the French landed during phylloxera. So phylloxera in France starts in the 1850s, 1860s. And you see people head over the Pyrenees Mountains, come to Spain, bring their winemaking techniques, and sort of help to modernize Spanish winemaking at the time. Here you also see producers that you're familiar with probably today, and Marqués de Riscal and Marqués de Borrieta, that got their starts in Bordeaux. So they return with the techniques that they learned there in France, including up to and including barrique aging, which is probably the most important, as well as several of the grapes. So Rioja actually does get hit with phylloxera though right around the turn of the century. Of course, there's fascism and Francisco Franco's rule that lasts from the 1930s until his death in 1975, which is sort of a dark period for viticulture in the region. But Rioja as a whole has been a viable wine region for well over 2,000 years, which is impressive. Here in the climate, the highlands are sort of in a rain shadow thanks to the nearby mountain chains. The summer temps rise as you get further inland. Rioja Oriental is certainly the warmest of the subregions, being that it's further to the east and most inland, followed by Alavesa. As far as geography and aspect is concerned, here you see the Pyrenees Mountains to the northeast that separate Spain and France. And then to the northwest of Rioja, you get the Cantabrian Mountains, which act as that rain shadow. The Ebro River that we showed earlier, it flows southeast from the Cantabrian through Rioja. And then your higher altitude subregions for Navarra are Val d'Arbe, Baja Montaña, and Tierra Estela that we saw at the tip top of that map that we were looking at just a few minutes ago. Less altitude you'll find are Ribera Alta and Ribera Baja. So whenever you see Ribera in your Navarra subregions, you can expect that it'll be lower altitude. Rioja Alta is, as far as soil types are concerned, driven by calcareous soils as well as Rioja Alavesa. And then as you get further east, this is where more alluvial and ferrous style of soils dominate, and why I think you see more Grenache grown in Oriental than you do in Alta and Alavesa. So 85% of it must be Tempranillo, Mazuelo, Graciano, Garnacha, Bacharina, Tinta, or 95% if these are destemmed. Of course, Mazuelo is also known as Carignan. You can use experimental grapes, and you do see some Cabernet Sauvignon to comprise the remainder. For white wines, Viura dominates, which is also known as Macabeo. You also have Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and Verdejo. And any of those can eclipse 50% of white blend. The other ones that are allowed are Garnacha Blanca, Malvasia Riojano, and Macerana Blanca. And then for Rosado wines, you have to use a minimum of 25% red grapes. So Navarra red wines is 60% of Navarra, although Rosado is pretty historically significant. As far as vinification techniques, you see American oak employed in the 1850s and 60s despite that French influence, because there was already transatlantic colonial trade that was making it less expensive than what the French oak was at the time. And then fast forward about 100 years after we get almost to the end of the Franco era, and you see Miguel Torres. We've talked about him before when we talk about South America. Obviously, his influence in Spain starts with stainless steel fermentation in Catalonia in the 1960s. And really, with stainless steel fermentation, of course, you have more control over the temperatures, and you're able to cool things down. Cooler temperatures, a little bit more fruit-driven styles, a little cleaner, some people would say even. And so modern technique really coming from that. As far as wine laws are considered, the Consejos Reguladores implemented for Rioja along with Jerez and Malaga in the 1930s. The DOs were actually approved in 1970. Recently, Viñedos Singulares labeling began in 2018. Here are some of the rules that you need to know for the single vineyard wines in the area. They have to be 35-year-old vines. The soils have got to be assessed. You have to have proof of working on the vineyard for a minimum of 10 years, pass a tasting panel, and hand harvested at less than 20 hectoliter per hectare, which is less than the required, excuse me. So Red Rioja would be at 45 hectoliters per hectare instead of, say, 65. Also, another new one that you need to be familiar with is Vino Espimoso de Calidad. These are traditional method sparkling wines in the area. They're hand harvested. The entire winemaking process actually must take place at the same facility. So you can't outsource your fruit to somebody else that makes sparkling wine for you to call it Vino Espimoso de Calidad. I guess that would probably just fall under cava production. Brut Nature, Extra Brut, and Brut only are the ones that are allowed. And you see 15 months minimum lease aging, 24 for Reserva, and 36 for Gran Reserva. So some pretty serious stuff. I actually haven't seen any of these in market yet. I certainly would look forward to getting the opportunity to taste them. I'll be in Spain next month. Maybe we'll go on a little bit of a search for them, so to speak. This is something that I think can commonly trip people up, and that's the aging requirements in Spain just in general, but also in Rioja, Navarra. So what I did here, and hopefully this makes sense to everyone as well, was I lined out a table with Crianza requirements, Reserva requirements, and Gran Reserva requirements. and then lined them up based upon, okay, these are generic Spanish reds, 24 and 6 for Crianza, 36 and 12, 60 and 8. I use months instead of trying to put in years. It just gives me a quick calculation so that I don't have to say 5 years and struggle with how many months that is. This is for Rioja Red. You can see the Crianza is the same. So the differences for Rioja Red are that 6 months of it are required to be in oak. And for Gran Reserva, that's 60 months total aging, 18 months in bottle, and this requires 24 months in oak, right? And then the oak for Rioja is 225 liter typically. For Navarra Red, you'll find that the maximum oak size, barrique size, is 330 liters, and so there's an extra 3 months required for Crianza, but it's the same as Spain for Reserva and Gran Reserva. So 60 months total for Gran Reserva, with 18 in bottle, I believe. Spanish white and Rosado are the same at 18 and 6, 24 and 6, and 48 and 6. What you'll find differences are I've highlighted here. So the only ones that are different than typical Spanish generic requirements are Rioja Red Reserva and Gran Reserva, Navarra Red Crianza, and Rioja White and Rosado. If that makes any sense, hopefully. Major subregions we talk about, we looked at Rioja on the map earlier, but just to sort of break these out a little bit further, Rioja Alta is the smallest and northernmost. It's technically in the Basque Country, and it's known for young wines, for vino joven wines, in which they do allow for carbonic maceration. Rioja Alavesa is southwestern and slightly warmer, classic age-worthy wines. Icios produces estate wines here. It's a super cool little area. And then Rioja Oriental, which we talked about, the heat, the alluvial soils, more ferrous and iron rich, really driven by Garnacha. In Rioja Alta, you'll find that little city of Haro. And I think it's very important to note that both Viña Tondonia and Bosconia from Lopez de Heredia come from here. The Tondonia sits on soils that are alluvial, limestone, and there are poplar fields right there. And then the Bosconia, it's a non-vintage Reserva blend. The Gran Reserva is made only in exceptional vintages, very Burgundian in style. And in fact, I've had the pleasure in working with some that go back to the 60s and 50s. And let me tell you, they are every bit worth what a 60, 70-year-old Burgundy would be worth, and they're delicious. Here's a cool little map that's actually on Guildsom that you can see sort of the little communes that are broken out. And so you see here in Haro, that first area that we talked about, you'll find Lopez de Heredia, La Rioja Alta, Muga, Rota, and Cune. And then Logroño, which is further over here, a little further inland, a little warmer area, you'll find Murrieta and Artadi. And then you see these other ones, Fuenmayor, Cinicero, which is super famous for Marcas de Cáceres, which is the largest exported wine to the United States from Spain, I believe still. San Vicente de la Somtierra, and Briones, which is Finca Allende, which is a great little value for Rioja. And then what you see here in Rioja Alavesa is La Bastidia and Ollón. Really no major communes that you'll find within Rioja Oriental. But I always think it's super fun to look at these two. And perhaps it's worth committing to memory that La Bastidia and Ollón are Alavesa, and the rest of them are in Rioja Alta. Maybe you want to know the major players that are in Haro too. Subregions of Aragon, we talked about Navarra earlier. The hot climate of Navarra really extends out to that Campo de Borja area where Garnacha, of course, is king. You also see Tempranillo and Viura there. Calatayud and Cariñena are predominantly Garnacha as well. Cariñena is the ancestral home of Carignan or Mazuelo. Somontano, which is the one that's further up in the north, literally translates to beneath the mountains, and it's in the foothills of the Pyrenees, and they grow a couple of grapes that you only find there, Alcanon and Paragreta. Thank you. Someone just mentioned that the H at the beginning of all the words in Spain is silent, so it's Arro and Heredia. So here you have major producers that have been around since the 1850s. Cune, Lopez de Heredia, La Rioja Alta, and Berceo. Important to note those. Other interesting notes with producers, you'll find that Marques de Riscal, the one that we discussed earlier with their Bordeaux roots, really features a Guggenheim-inspired design building. You cannot miss this place. If you're in Rioja, make sure that you go by it. Other Dio Pago producers of Aragon. This is always a fun question. People throw out Dio Pago, and you don't see many of them. In Tierra Estela, in that northwestern area, you find Prado de Roche and Signorio de Arenzano. I've seen both of these in market and tasted them both. And then in Valtasarbe in the north, you'll find Bodegas Otazu. I think it's important to note, too, that we specifically talk about producers that are iconic to the region. And so I think we'll certainly touch on Lopez de Heredia. We talked about Tondonia earlier being limestone soils. Bosconia is sort of 40-year-old vines. Cubillo is their 40-year-old vines as well. The Gravonia is 45-year-old Viura vines, interestingly enough. And it's the only winery in Spain that uses their own cooperage. So these are all from the Appalachian Mountains, interestingly enough. And the great vintages for Spain, this is very generic. And I hate to give you all a vintage chart, so to speak, but these are just sort of in general vintages that you want to know for north central Spain. The 1980s, 81, 82, and 89. The 1990s, 94, and 95 were fantastic. The 2000s had a good run, 01, 04, 05, 08, 09. The 2010s, though, it's been extremely solid since 2012. So that's the show for today. North Central Spain in a nutshell and sort of in a whirlwind. Hopefully that brings some attention to Rioja and Navarra as well. Of course, as with any of our presentations, there's much more digging that can be done, and I encourage you to do that all on your own. I'm going to record this and throw it up on the YouTube channel for anybody that knows someone that may have missed or wants to catch up with us. They certainly can. Next week, I've switched the schedule around to where we would do Spain today, and then we'll go back to spirits and take a look at brandy, Calvados, Cognac, and Armagnac for next week. So have a happy Sunday, and I'll catch up with you guys next week. Cheers.